Man, A Small Good Thing by Raymond Carver. The intensity of this story is very, very difficult for a person to wrap their head around unless they're a parent. I mean, you can still kind of tap into it, but unless you've built empathy, unless you've experienced the pain of a child and, the having a child and loving a child, my gosh, the story just gets worse every time I read it. And when I say worse, I just mean the emotional intensity of the story. Araby is interesting because it deals with an epiphany that is, relatively of little consequence. Araby is much more melancholic. It's kind of depressing, and just kind of, brooding and emo. I can imagine that kid eventually wearing the dark eyeliner and all that stuff. But overall, no one dies. Nothing horrible happens to anybody in that story. It's a coming-of-age story, and we get the chance that the kid's undergone a major change, and we can kind of understand how his life would be affected. But Raymond Carver, if you ever get the chance, holy moly, read some more Raymond Carver. Chase him down, because his stories are just so unbelievably powerful. In this story, obviously, we have an innocuous beginning where we're not quite aware of the intensity that we're going to be hit with. And this is something that he does quite often. But the child, in this case, Scotty, it's been a long time since I read the story. I've been just basically going over my notes for it. But Scotty gets hit by a car, and his mom was on the way to pick up a birthday cake. That is a real good definition of irony. A lot of people talk about irony, and this is something that's going to come up on the final, so, take a little bit of a mental note. People think of irony because of that stupid Alanis Morissette song. It's like, rain on your wedding day, good vibes. That's not irony. That's simply bad luck. Irony is when something happens that completely contradicts or is somehow monstrously inappropriate. Dramatic irony is when the audience knows something that the people in the story don't know, and that's that contradiction, when we know the whole time in Romeo and Juliet that Romeo and Juliet are basically worm food, and so we're going through the entire tragedy building up to that point. In this case, the irony is that Scotty is hit by a car and fatally injured on his birthday. I mean, just let that sink in for a minute. And, again, keep in mind as I laugh at this, I laugh because that's kind of the only sane reaction to something this just heinously, hideously awful. And the mother is anticipating this birthday, is anticipating this happy occurrence. We get this long scene of her, ordering this cake, and we kind of get a little bit of impression that the baker is kind of a, lonely or kind of socially maladjusted guy. I've known plenty of them in my life. Let's divide the story into two parts, because the story really has like two primary, units of execution, in that we have the beginning where Scotty is hurt, hit by the car, driver runs, nothing is ever revealed about him. There's no sense of evil being punished or anything like that. So that makes this reading extremely realistic. So another big part of the irony of this is that if you know anything about medicine, and if you know anything about head injuries, which it's kind of obvious that that's what Scotty had, the absolute worst thing that the mother can do for her child at this point is put him to bed. Because when you have a concussion, you should not sleep. You need to get to a hospital right away, because if you sleep, if you pass out, you lose consciousness, any problems that have happened in your brain are likely to become much, much worse. So we're watching this woman basically do the exact opposite of what she should do. Is that her fault? I mean, she probably doesn't even know the nature of the injury, not like the reader does, knowing that Scotty was hit by a car. So the irony and the tension and just the absolute gut-wrenching descent of Scotty's health as the story drags on. Oh my gosh, it's nauseating. Because the parents keep having their hope built up. The doctors try to minimize what's happening. Oh, he'll wake up at any moment. He'll wake up at any moment. And the conversation gradually starts to deteriorate as Scotty's condition is not improving and in fact starts to get worse and worse. It makes it more painful. It makes it just so agonizingly clear that this is something he's not going to be able to escape. And they're still fighting against it, still hoping, still holding on. And to the point that, like, I think the real crux of this story for me, the part that hurts the most, is something that I understand very well because, you know, I watched my kids go through some quite complicated health problems themselves, is when the mother sees the family in the waiting room, and she sees, I don't remember exactly what the situation was. It's an amazing situation because it's a family obviously going through a similar grief with an injured child, something like that. And her thoughts at this point basically go to, don't have kids. Just don't do it. It's like, at first it's like a strange reaction that she's feeling copious amounts of love and pain because of what's happening to her child and that desperate need for him to be okay. And her feeling towards this family that's, you know, on the edge of grieving is don't have kids. It's an incredibly selfish emotion, but it's also a very understandable, as she's experiencing this agony of this child, you know, getting closer and closer to death's doorstep. And for her basically to despair of her love for him. Just roll that around in your head for a minute. I know most of the people in this class are probably either fresh out of high school or joint high school enrolled. But you got to try to internalize this a little bit. To internalize and understand and try to feel this pain that this woman is experiencing. That it's so wretched that it's almost destroyed her desire to have kids. And to say to other people, don't do it, it ain't worth it. And of course we have the father. We don't get inside the father's head the way that we do with the mother. But they're doing this absolutely just dreadful balancing act between staying with Scotty and going home to eat and sleep. They're just doing these shifts, right? And it becomes a death watch as they don't want to leave Scotty alone. I mean, my gosh, just let this sink in for a minute. When my grandfather passed away, we were doing the exact same thing. As, you know, my mother and aunts and uncles, we were all just kind of like rotating in and out of the hospice because somebody had to be there at all times. And man, it's just, I think that's one of the reasons I like this story so much is, you know, the particular aspects of it that can connect with your personal experience. And it's funny because I'm starting to think I don't need to cover this story in 1102. Most of the people going through 1102 are going to have absolutely no emotional connection with this because most of my students in this class are young and may not have had the experience of being as close to death as somebody my age has. When you start having parents on death's doorstep, when you have grandparents, when, my gosh, yeah, losing a child. This is the last comment I'm going to make before we wrap this up for part 2 to come later. The real horrifying part of this story that I like to interject is this as well. The husband and wife are probably not going to make it. They're probably not going to stay together. I mean, their relationship is 100% healthy throughout the course of the story. But yeah, look up the statistics sometime on what happens when a couple loses a child, especially if it's their only child. It's devastating, and it tends to completely destroy the marriage. Now, I've already done a discussion question with regard to a blog that I wrote, but let's do one more just for good measure. You want to get you a good discussion question out of this? Riddle me this. Why is it that most couples who lose their only child fall apart? Any ideas? Yeah. I need to play Xbox.